Well, I guess we'll go ahead and kick it off. And what we're going to talk about today is, and I didn't actually mean for like my website to be the first thing showing. It wasn't like, that's not the purpose of this. I just had it up as an example. But what we want to talk about is the difference between and the pros and cons of using a headless CMS. And I think I asked on Twitter what the best name for the opposite of a headless CMS was. And I think we came up with embedded CMS made the most sense. So I don't know if that's like everyone's official term for how they would phrase this, but it made sense for me. And that's what I think we're running with here. Um, why don't we let Brad, why don't you give an introduction to who you are, what you do, and then I'll give a little bit of background on our conversations leading up to this. And then we'll just kind of jump into conversation. And what we would like to have is this be partially at least driven by comments and questions and things in the chat. So if you're in the Jamstack, if you're looking at Headless CMS, if you don't know what any of that is and you have questions, throw them in the chat and we'll try to kind of follow along with the questions, answer those, and help that drive the conversation. So all that said, Brad, do you want to give an intro?
Absolutely, man. First of all, thanks for having me on. My name is Brad Garropy. I'm a self-taught web developer and I work at Adobe. Some of the big projects I've worked on are product recommendations for Magento e-commerce and doing a little bit of work on the new search product. And I primarily work in all the fun technologies of React, styled components, GraphQL. So I'm definitely doing like a very modern stack. And I have a pretty solid background in Jamstack because a lot of my personal projects and side projects all have to do with like Gatsby and different CMSs.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sweet.
that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned like I'm all the fun technologies because in my mind it's absolutely right. Like I was at my previous job at FedEx, like we had full stack stuff. So we were doing Java backend, and then we moved from Angular JS to Angular 4, 5, 6, 7, I think. And I would always be like taking the opportunities to do the cool stuff. And actually, some of the backend stuff was really cool for me too, but especially on the front end. And I'm curious, do you mind sharing a little bit more about experience-wise being self-taught? Like you didn't get a degree at all. Did you go through a boot camp? Did you like take any certifications or anything? What was your background there?
Yeah, so my educational background, I went to the University of Texas and I got an electrical and computer engineering degree, which basically entailed like one, maybe two programming courses.
Yep.
But most of it was like circuits, logic, data structures,
Mm-hmm.
but really not a lot of pure programming. Um, so once I graduated, I worked for Dell for quite a long time, and I decided it was time to move into web development. And so I did do Python programming at Dell, but when I set out learning web dev, I just took straight to YouTube. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't go to a boot camp. I didn't pay for any courses. It was strictly YouTube videos and a lot of reading the documentation and trial and error.
Yep. Sweet. I just made a post, I think it was yesterday on Twitter about, so I have a computer science degree and I took a lot of programming classes, but they were much more theoretical. Like we ended up spending a lot of time, especially in data structures class, of like building data structures from scratch. Obviously, almost all those data structures are in all the languages that you would use. So it's good experience to understand how they work. But by the time I graduated, and I think part of this was on me because I approached school as school, right? It was just like I wanted to get good grades and graduate. I didn't have the passion, I didn't have the enjoyment for everything I was doing. And like by the end of my degree, I had never used Git, I'd never done source control, never done GitHub. I'd only used a terminal from an internship. Like I hadn't really used a terminal, hadn't really used Linux. Had never actually, fun fact, took a web development class that I never went to, not once to class, and got an A. So that'll like tell you it was basically a joke. And I didn't know any, like I couldn't build a website, I couldn't put it on a server, I couldn't do any of the stuff that I know now. And so I consider myself like to have a degree, but also to be like very much self-taught from the amount of time that I've spent on YouTube. And then I spent a little bit of money on $10 courses on Udemy. Yeah, I just think it's so cool. Like, especially in this industry, you've got so many opportunities to learn and so many different resources that are either really cheap or completely free.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think you wrote that blog post recently about boot camps
Mm-hmm.
versus degrees, and your kind of takeaway there was, hey, if you do a boot camp, you're coming out probably better prepared to contribute in the real world, and
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree with that. And I could say the same thing for self-taught. Like you kind of wind up in the same bucket where
Yep.
your experience is just much more practical by the time you're done learning.
Yep. And I think we could like redo that entire conversation, which
Yeah.
I really enjoy, especially for people that have like questions about it. But we could try to pivot a little bit and give a little bit of background on like why we are here together. One, you've been like really active in my streams, which has been super, super helpful. Like I don't know anyone else that has been as consistently engaged and helpful with like fixing things or feedback or just commenting as you have. So I really appreciate that. Another side one is like you've proofread some blog posts, even ones in a good way that I didn't ask you to, and sent me like, hey, there's this little grammar thing. So like you've been really engaged. You've paid a lot of attention. I really appreciated that. And we just started to have this conversation about Headless CMS versus Embedded CMS because I went through recently on some streams of migrating from Embedded CMS, which is in my case, markdown files in my source code for my James Q Quick site. So everything on my blog was just embedded markdown files until the last couple of weeks where I have been migrating and am most of the way there. At least it's in production now, but I've got some other things I would like to add of moving to a Headless CMS in Insanity.io, and had lots of support from that team. Had Knut from Sanity.io on the streams. And anyway, so we've just kind of had this like in the stream conversation and then behind the scenes conversation, and figured it'd be a great one to get on here and talk about. So again, if you have questions, if you have like leading questions or things that you would want to take this conversation for people in the chat, feel free to guide this in any way that you see fit. And then I guess we could, I don't know if you want to kick off and just kind of do a high level about what a Headless CMS is, what Embedded CMS means, and we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I kind of put them in two buckets, Headless CMSs and Embedded CMSs. So a Headless CMS is typically software as a service that allows you to kind of create data types. And, the easiest example is a blog post, which has a title, an author, a date, some content. And this software as a service will store it in a database for you and then generally give you an API to access it. And so that's why it's called headless. It doesn't come with any kind of integrated front end. It has no head.
Yep.
And so, yeah, those deliverables for you are essentially an API. Now, the embedded CMS, there's a lot of different ways you could do this, but most typically an embedded CMS is I'm going to take my content or my data and store it in my repository. And that's kind of how I define an embedded CMS. But I would assume there's probably some variation there that I haven't really considered.
For me, that's the high level. I often start with, I use WordPress as an example a lot. Because WordPress, like Magento is a popular CMS, but I think WordPress just has dominated the landscape. One, for people building like really high quality sites, but then especially for people who were new to web and just wanted to get a site up, really dominated that area as well. And what WordPress does is WordPress gives you the actual CMS, and CMS stands for, by the way, Content Management System. It's just the thing that can help manage, good to cover that, yeah. Just the thing that can help basically give you a GUI to create data, to add data. The most popular example is blog posts. And one of the issues of what people kind of started to have trouble with is the fact that like, and I've actually experienced this too, is with WordPress, it's your CMS, but it's also your website itself. So it's the thing, like you have to go through WordPress to be able to create the front end for your app, which means like you either buy a theme or you find a theme and you use that. And then if you hit limitations, then you go into writing your own PHP and you try to customize it. And I never did any PHP, and I could never or didn't want to go like all the way behind the scenes of WordPress and really customize the front end. So now we're getting into this area, and it's not all that different than like microservices. If you're familiar with like microservices architecture and breaking things up into like smaller, independent, self-sufficient items, of like the data part of your application can be completely separate. And this is, again, like you said, headless CMS. There's no head, there's no front end. It's just data. And then separately, whatever the front end is that you want to use to interact with that data and display it, you do that and you choose it and you go from there.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned WordPress, there's almost a third tier, a third category of CMSs where It's like a CMS as a service, where they do provide front end. Like you could kind of call these website builders like
Mm-hmm.
Squarespace, Wix,
Yep.
WordPress. They do include a front end piece and your content management system. So yeah, there might actually be 3 tiers.
Yeah, and we could. I mean, I could speak to those at least in general terms of how they work. I don't know that I could go like deep behind the scenes of how they work, but I think the trend here, and you can't. I don't think you can talk about any of this stuff without getting into Jamstack. And there's a WTF. I forget what the site is. Jamstack.wtf of
Nice.
what is Jamstack, which is pretty brief, but I think a really good explanation of what Jamstack is. And it stands for JavaScript APIs and Markup. And I heard Jason Langsdorff talk about how like deceiving of a name that is, because it's like those things are not actually unique, right? Like we've been using JavaScript, we've been using APIs, and we've been using markup. That is not that unique. In my mind, like Jamstack is just we're kind of rethinking how we build websites as a whole. And I don't know if you have a comment on that.
I think one of the most important things about Jamstack is that the initial content delivered is static. Like the HTML that comes from the server right on your first GET request has content inside of it.
Yep, that seems to be like maybe the biggest trend with that is getting into static sites. And I give this example a lot with a WordPress site. When you go to like the page that lists out all of your blog posts, what happens is you go to that page, you make a request to that page to the server. The server will go to the database, get the information about all the posts that it needs, and then use that to render HTML and send it back to the user. With static sites, all of that stuff has already been done, to your point, beforehand, where at build time, it'll go to the database, it will grab all of that information, and then go ahead and render that to HTML so that it's just a file, basically, or a set of files that get sent back when you make a request to that API or to that to the endpoint to that site. So yeah, if people are new to the idea of Jamstack, this is a good article that's or website, I guess, that's pretty simple, and I just kind of like their explanation of what it was and would be worth looking at. So maybe I can start a little bit from the embedded CMS of talking about what I use to build my site originally, and then we can get into like why I decided to move and what that looked like. So I use a static site generator, and these are also becoming very popular. So I need to be careful of the phrasing for Gatsby, which is what I use. It's built on React. They do more than build static sites, but that is a big part of what they do. So I use Gatsby, again, built on top of React as the tool that will build my static site in terms of my site here. And what it does is, if I look at my source code, I will get rid of this eventually, or probably just archive these, but embedded in my actual source code is a directory called post. For each one of these folders, there's a markdown file with front matter, or just like metadata about the post, and then the actual content of the post down here. So this is literally in my source code. You can check it in Git, you can see it in Git, and this is what we refer to as like an embedded CMS, where all of your content is right there inside of your source code, and you get complete control over how you create it, how you manage it, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and I think it's important to jump in here and say that content doesn't have to be markdown. Like these files could be any files, .ini files. These could be JSON files. Any way of storing data.
Yep.
That's your content.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to the point of you get full control over it, right? You decide how you want it stored, you decide how you want to create it. And in my case, the creation process, and this is one of the problems that I had or wanted to change, is for me, if I wanted to add a new blog post, I would like copy one of these existing ones. So I would like Command C and then Command V and go and update this folder to say, all right, this is 20 and this is my new post. And then inside of here, I may or may not have images, and I would go inside of here and get rid of all the content and scroll up to the top. And then now it's my responsibility to update all these properties. And one of the things, this is like a pet peeve of mine, that I would have to do is like manually type out the slug, which seems like a really small thing, but like converting all of this to lowercase and then adding the dashes is like a few seconds of my time that I felt like was just annoying, I guess, at the end of the day.
So that's interesting. That's a problem that I was thinking of solving in a couple different ways. There's an article on CSS Tricks that Chris Coyer just put out talking about VS Code tasks, and I think you can actually make a task in your editor that could scaffold something like this out.
So I've been wanting to do something like this, and I was thinking maybe
Yeah.
just like a node script, like it could be anything, but I'm curious about what the VS Code tasks are, because I have no idea what that is.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna look into them tonight. But
Okay.
another way to do this is just like you were saying, a node script. I'm
Mm-hmm.
building a new project called Daily Texas Country, which is a Gatsby site with an embedded CMS, and I'm looking for quick ways to do things related to the project. And one of the things that I was going to do, you could go to the second link is my landing page.
The Reddit one?
Oh no, actually. Yeah, you could just go to dailytexascountry.com and you'll find it.
Okay. dailytexascountry.com.
Uh-huh.
Sweet.
And then just slap a dev dot in front of it if you want to see the one with that content in there. Yeah, so I was thinking about
dev dot.
Correct, yeah. Perfect.
So is that like a development preview?
Yes, exactly. So this is just a
Cool.
A Netlify build with a named branch that they automatically deploy to a subdomain for you.
I need to figure this out, because I do
For sure.
I do preview deploys, but I just take the whatever URL they give me. I don't have like a dedicated it will always go here. Maybe this is a later thing. I want to know how you did that.
For sure, yeah. So like as far as taking your embedded CMS and getting some kind of organization around it, you're right. A node script is a great idea. And I was thinking about creating like in this case, a DTXC command line tool that would allow me to, scaffold out a new post,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe like upload a new YouTube video automatically and tweet about it, and like kind of do these sorts of things so that if I ever needed to like place some automation around content management without a CMS, I could kind of invent it myself.
And so there's two takes, at least from my perspective, of what you're saying. And I want to elaborate more on what you're saying also, but two different things of how you can interpret that. One, as a developer and having an embedded CMS, again, you have full control over what you want to do. And that is like really empowering. And you would probably agree, like it's a lot of fun to just build random stuff to help like facilitate the things that you're doing in your day-to-day basis. The flip side of that is those type of things probably already exist in something like a headless CMS. And now it's your responsibility to create it. And it takes some amount of time, even if it's relatively simple, it takes some amount of time for you to actually do that.
You're trading flexibility for convenience. And when we swap around to talking about headless, I have a great example of how that can kind of bite you in the butt. The convenience factor can bite you in the butt.
Cool. All right. So, and to add to the idea of what you're saying, and I kind of think this would still be useful. I would like to create a very simple GUI where people can choose what the name of a field is and then what the value is, and maybe give them like a date picker and generate this thing for them just to do front matter. So like I could have like little templates of like, here's the properties that you might want, title, slug, publish date, tags, and you could customize it. And then all it will do would be like generate this, and I could either like let them download that as a markdown file and then copy it into their project, or they could literally just like copy and paste that into a new markdown file themselves.
Yeah, if you really wanted to do it right on the system, you could write an Electron app that, you have file system access, you give it your Gatsby directory and, maybe the path to your posts, and there you go.
Yep.
So that's really, if you think about it, that's all a CMS really is it's a GUI to update meta information about your content.
Yep. And there is, a couple of the implications, I guess, of a headless CMS, of an embedded CMS, is it's in your source code. So at any point you can obviously like go back and go to different versions of your stuff. And in this case, like I can do a git reset hard, and actually I'm not tracking those, so it won't get rid of them, but you can use git to like go back through history. You can track history, you can revert, you can do all the things to like never lose all of your stuff. And even if the code like wipes out on my computer, it's available out there on GitHub. And just real quick on the comments, Chris is asking, what are we doing? First of all, we're just having a blast and hanging out and having fun. And then second of all, we're talking about Headless CMS and versus Embedded CMS. So the pros and cons, some of our experience, what some of your options are. And I think right now we're just kind of talking about some of the implications of the Embedded CMS first, and then we'll switch over here in a second.
So another great reason to use an embedded CMS is if you host your code on GitHub, you can actually allow people to make pull requests.
Mm-hmm.
So earlier on, James was talking about how I had proofread a blog post of his and I found a typo. And I said, hey, I'd love to fix this for you and submit a PR, right?
Which, but, who am I to say no to that?
Yeah. But, he had recently transitioned over to Sanity on a couple of his past streams. And so now that's locked down to him at this point. Now, he can open it up to specific users, I assume, but in general, your content management system will be locked down to, only the editors of the content.
Yep. And as much as I do trust you, like I probably wouldn't want to give you full access to my Headless CMS.
Exactly.
I don't know. Like anything could happen at that point. But that is one of the really, really neat things. And that's what like Gatsby, as an example of one we've talked about already, the Gatsby docs in I think a lot of places, all their docs are open source. So you have the ability, like you said, and we were talking about contributing to open source. I think we've both done some pull requests that are just like doc changes. And so because that's inside of the source code, we have the ability to do that. But then they also have the ability to vet that that it makes sense before they actually approve it, right?
Yep. And the man himself, Wes Boss, follows this model. He says, I'm just going to let all the nitpickers fix the issues for me.
And I think there's like a meme, or maybe he said it, I can't remember. Like if you ever want to get developers engaged, like just have a typo on like a slide or something, and they'll let you know and they'll start to be engaged.
Yeah.
Chris, what are we talking about getting? Don't change the
What's
site.
weird?
Don't get weird. Have we gotten weird already? Or you're ready to? Maybe we should be getting weird. I'll have to figure out what weird is in this case. Oh, Chris, while you're here, you can't see it all the way, but in which corner am I in? In this corner over here, my Supernatural poster is back on the wall, by the way. So you should be proud of that. And you're saying the dude in the top corner, I just found a GIF in Slack and used that same image for something.
That's the guy's name is Luke Combs. He's a country artist.
Oh, that's Luke Combs.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of country. I rarely see them and rarely know what they look like. I just kind of know the songs. That's funny. All right. So we talked about embedded CMS. You have full control. It's in your source code. It's a little bit tedious maybe to create the post because you're manually creating files, updating files, adding metadata. One of the benefits is you can take pull requests to update your data from other people. So you can like let the masses take care of like typos and things like that. I think one of the things that was most important for me and one of the things I was most excited about is with an embedded CMS, the workflow in terms of like getting things published and deployed was absolutely seamless. Like if I put a new post, like after you have it set up to read your post, if I have a new post in there, I do a build, that post is there. I just do a push to my master branch, or in your case, a preview branch. I got to figure out how to send that to a specific URL. But like that, it just works. You add it to your Git, you check it in, you push it to a branch, and after you have continuous integration up in something like Netlify, which is incredibly stupidly simple, I guess that's like oxymoronic there, but incredibly simple, it's just out there and it's live and it's ready to go.
Yeah, and that definitely depends on your tooling, but right now we're kind of in a golden age of like how Git is the center of your everything is becoming Git centric, meaning your content management, your build and deploy process, everything is based around Git and branching and commits.
Yep. And being a developer, that like, again, it just worked. I think one of the other things with that, because I had a couple of my sites on WordPress to start, and I had this big, huge issue of like running locally and then deploying. And I ended up getting this plugin. I think it's like WDB Migrate Pro or something. And the plugin literally just like took a copy of everything I had locally and FTP'd it up. So like I didn't have to do the FTP myself. It took care of it for me. It just was weird. It wasn't natural. Like this is so much more natural, and that doesn't necessarily change with the headless CMS. Like headless CMS still works, but in comparison to like quote unquote a WordPress days or the older way of doing things before the idea of Jamstack, it was really unnatural and uncomfortable for me. And I think with that too, I didn't have the ability to like check that stuff into source code or there was at least no like automatic promotion to the live site from source code check-in.
Yeah, right. What you have in Git or your source code repository may not be what's live. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep. Question for just to kind of check in the chat. Who is here? Who uses a headless CMS? Who uses an embedded CMS? Who still don't know what any of those things are? Just let us know how you're doing in the chat. And we'll continue to just kind of talk through this.
So one of the neat things about whether you're using headless or embedded is that a lot of times you still get to pick your own kind of front end tooling. Yep. And I think that's a positive here, right? As the site creator, you get a lot of choice. Yep. And a lot of this is kind of developer focused. So like, we should talk about the editing experience of embedded CMSs. Most of the time you're working with kind of raw markdown files or, raw JSON files, something like that to control your data. Mm-hmm. This kind of means that you have to be comfortable in an editor or with GitHub to kind of push these changes up and deploy. So it is very like tech savvy and developer centric.
Yep. That's a really great point that I'm glad you brought up, because as used to Markdown as I am now, when I first saw Markdown, I don't know why, but I was like, this doesn't make any damn sense. I don't know what this is. Like, yeah. And I was a developer, right? I just hadn't seen or used Markdown before. So one of the biggest implications, and I hadn't even like thought to bring this up, so I'm glad you did, is if you have contributors who are going to be contributing to whatever the blog, for example, or whatever the data is that aren't technical, like you can't expect them to go in and make pull requests to update things, right? Or to add blog posts. Like having a GUI is the best way to go for that. A couple of comments in the chat. WebDev Charlie says he's using markup. Is that like, and so is markup, what does markup actually encompass altogether? So like Markdown is an example of markup. Markup is also like HTML is markup, right? Like it's a markup language, right?
Yeah, I always thought markup is just another word for HTML. I didn't know it applied to anything else.
I think my interpretation at least is it's just more general. And so things fall into that category of markup. So I like somebody in the chat clarify if either one of us makes sense, or so it's just HTML.
HTML, yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. So yeah, I mean, it stands for hypertext markup language.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Now, SGML, I've never heard that before.
Yeah, never. Okay. So we're going way back in the history of all this stuff. So markup is just HTML. And I guess we look at like, I interpret markup as falling into that category, maybe just because it like, you can put regular HTML in markup and it just kind of naturally flows into like HTML itself, I guess. I don't know.
Oh, you're talking about how you can put HTML in Markdown and it's still parsed.
Markdown, yes. Sorry.
Yes.
Yep. Another comment from CodeStacker. This is actually really cool to hear. CodeStacker is migrating his site from migrating to Headless CMS currently, and I've convinced him to go with Sanity, which I will talk about obviously in a second. And there's tons of different options, and I think there's tons of really, really amazingly good options. I have settled on Sanity for myself, and I'll talk about why in a minute. But that's really cool to hear. And please reach out if I can help, because I almost feel like an advocate for Sanity at this point, just because they've been so helpful for me that I want to share how good that their stuff is. SGML stands for Standard Generalized Markup Language. SGML, XHTML, HTML, VML, mid 1980s. I don't know how old you are. We haven't talked about this, but I was born in 91, so this is like even before I was born.
Yeah, I'm 1987,
Okay.
so early 30s now. Crossed that line.
Nice. I'll be 30 February 7th of next year, so 2021. And then my wife is a few months older, so she'll be 30 in October.
Mm,
So yeah, it's a big big year
yep.
for us. Chris thinks I'm a baby because he's 4 5 years older, which is fine. I'm totally like I'm a '90s kid all the way through. So I'm not embarrassed to be in the '90s at all. What's really weird now, like I feel like one of those old people when I hear people say they were born in the 2000s or like the 2010s. I'm like, what?
Oh yeah.
Like it makes sense, but it's still just like weird. Um,
COBOL
COBOL.
making a comeback.
The only
Nice.
way I think COBOL is staying in the game is just because people can't like migrate existing stuff, so they have to have someone at like a given company. There's always like that one person who probably makes a shit ton of money because no one else can do that job.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so Austin says, or Todd, sorry,
Todd.
says, oh, is Austin just like the city Austin and then name Todd?
His last name actually.
Okay, got it. Jamstack, Headless, all the stuff you're talking about. Have you used this kind of stuff at your jobs or mainly for personal stuff? That's a really good question. I would say in general, Jamstack type stuff, Headless CMS stuff is relatively new, especially in bigger companies. And I come from the perspective of having worked at FedEx, which is a like really old school IT culture. It's been around for so long that like it's not as quick to modernize. It's not a younger company that has the ability to just jump out and do new things. Almost everything that I did, and for the most part, the things I saw, Java backend with Spring Boot microservices, which was a lot of fun, and then a front end like Angular and like a SQL database. And SQL database was pretty prevalent across the company. Now, the one thing we did do is for some of our internal docs that we didn't do that great of a job of maintaining, we used Hugo. So we did use the static site generator for that. And I think, at least from our perspective there, that is a really good example of like, we just need to throw some pages together of docs. We don't need anything fancy, embed it all in the source code. And then you've got developers that are working on it, or like people can give them feedback and they can still update it. But like that, it made sense for us in that documentation space. I will say that at Auth0, we use Contentful, and we have, I don't even know how much stuff in Contentful. So I don't work on that myself, but we do use Contentful to store things like our events page. Our events are stored inside of Contentful, and they go through some sort of build process. As well as, sorry, one last thing, the blog for Auth0 goes through like a static, I forget, it's Jekyll maybe? Don't quote me on that. But it goes through a static build process as well. So those things are definitely happening. I would say enterprise, bigger companies, it's probably less, but you're probably seeing more like specific use cases for people using Jamstack, Headless, that kind of stuff at work. I don't know if your experience is similar.
Yeah, so ton of my personal stuff is Jamstack just because the output it tends to be static websites, right?
Yep.
And it's easy and free to host. But professionally, Magento does use a static site generator. I believe it is Jekyll for their documentation, and they're considering moving to Gatsby. They've got proof of concepts up and running at this point. But otherwise, no, not too much that I know of professionally. And James is right. It's fairly new tech, but where you do see this used quite a bit is in agency work.
Yep.
It's very easy to like kind of templatize some basic website layouts with static site generators. And it's very quick to just throw up like company pages with an about, with the pricing and whatnot in Jamstack style sites.
And I think so. That would have been the same thing with WordPress 10 years ago, right? Like agencies would have done a lot of WordPress work for the exact same reason that they could like they could do like their own custom extensions and things in WordPress and themes, and they could extend those and just reuse it. I think like exactly what you said, I was going to say it too. With agencies, that's a great place for people to start to use these modern technologies because it makes it so much easier on them to actually build it with the skill sets that people have now. And the things that people are interested in. And honestly, like it's a big deal of what tech companies choose is just based on what they can hire for, what's going to be the most productive and then what people are interested in. Like if I'm not a C person myself, but less people now are coming out of college or a degree or anything, just self-learning. And they're like, oh, I want to go write C. That's just not really the case. Like there's still plenty of things that really need performance and all that kind of stuff with C, but that's not the thing that people are as excited about, I would say, like generally. So WebDev Charlie says most agency clients want a CMS, but they never touch it. Fair enough. But you also, again, still in like what we're talking about today, you could get a headless CMS and tie it into a Jamstack static site anyway. Chris is hopping out. Chris, thanks for coming. I struggle with this too. I had 2 of my teammates were doing streams earlier at the same time, and I was like, oh, I want to be at both, but can't see it all. So thanks for coming in.
Yeah, to kind of go off of Charlie's comment, we talked about that embedded CMSs don't offer a great editing experience, but when you're doing agency work and delivering sites to clients, this is where, headless CMSs work really well because they give a great editing experience.
I got distracted because I guess I can just say it in chat and not in chat now. But Chris Saltenburnham says my teammate Sam and Kurt from Apollo are still going on their stream, which like I thought they ended like 2 hours ago because maybe it was just like their waiting screen and they started back up. I'm not sure, but it like went to, unless I just lost connection. I don't know. I thought they were done, but if they're still going, that's wild.
Dang. What are they working on?
Authentication in GraphQL endpoints with Apollo, which is super cool. So
cool.
I did my first like actual specific introduction to GraphQL last week with Andrew Mead, who joined on Friday, which was great because I've used GraphQL inside of Gatsby and I'm familiar with it. I know the concepts. I know the general idea of what it's there for, and I know what a basic query looks like. I'd never done anything behind the scenes, like actually defining a GraphQL server. So he just walked through all the basics with me, which is absolutely fantastic. And the one that Sam was doing is just like adding Auth0 on top of that, where you include like an access token if we get into Auth0 stuff, and you got a JWT, and on the server in the Apollo, you have to parse that JWT, verify that it's a valid JWT, and then based on that, allow access to whatever that endpoint is. And by the way, while we're semi on this track, and I'll get us back here in a second. If you're new to the channel, I do work at Auth0, where we do identity and security, and our goal is to make integrating authentication and authorization into your applications from the developer or development perspective as easy as possible. So that's what we focus on. And I'm really excited about, we've got an upcoming stream on May 5th at 10 a.m. Pacific time of adding authentication on Gatsby. So Gatsby, a lot of people typically think of as being a static site generator, and it's a little confusing of how authentication ties into that because you hear static sites and you don't really think about that. So if you're interested in anything identity and security and that kind of stuff, and specifically this episode that's coming up on May 5th, we're going to be doing the authentication in Gatsby. So definitely check out the Auth0 channel if you're here and new.
Yeah, I remember the first time I implemented JWT authentication on my own, and I was like, that's it. I'm never doing that again. I'm going to use a service. It was crazy.
And yeah, there's definitely that. And then there's so many things that, at least from my perspective, so much more to it that like you could go through a tutorial and you could set it up yourself and it would be tricky and you would stumble along and you would get through it. There's so many more like really technical security things that you don't even know to think about. That is one of the benefits of letting someone else do it. And obviously at Auth0, like we've got 100 people or whatever that their full-time job is to make sure that stuff is secure and that the platform is just amazing to work with. So anyway, I'll get off the Auth0 soapbox, but I do get to do this during Auth0 hour. So I love to show a little love to the channel there and the stuff that we're doing. So let's pivot a little bit and start the headless CMS conversation by me talking a little bit about why I got frustrated or tired of the embedded markdown stuff. One, we talked about this a little bit, like just something simple as like writing out this metadata, copying over a new folder, adding a new markdown file, typing this stuff in, making sure that it's formatted correctly. It's just tedious. For me, I was like, that's why I thought about building a GUI to like generate some of the stuff for me. And then you go down the slippery slope of like, well, there's a headless CMS. So I started looking at Headless CMS options and posted on Twitter about the fact that I see a gap in pricing. And this is one of the concerns with Headless CMSs is most of them have pretty generous free tiers, which I think we can probably agree you most likely never make it out of. In the event that you do make it out of the pricing for a Headless CMS or the free tier, the pricing one can be, or the next tier up can be $50. It could be $100, $200, or $800, which is wild. And I wanted to, for me personally, I wanted to be really careful of that. So I'll talk about that more in a minute. But you get into this idea of like, one, you get a GUI, and here's an example of what one looks like. This is my Sanity one. Doesn't matter that it's Sanity. It's just a GUI to add data. So here's where I can add all of my blog posts and a cover image and tags and all this kind of stuff. That's really nice. And then, like we said earlier, you get the ability to share this experience with other people that are not technical, in the sense that like they might not want to work with Markdown or do pull requests to add content. They can get this GUI here to go and add all the things that they want to, and probably at a high level. That's the coolest thing about Headless CMS, is just that they're like, I don't know anyone that would prefer not to work in a GUI if they had the opportunity and it was done well.
Yeah, I hear you. The GUI stuff makes life really, really nice. It makes you feel like you're not writing code when you're sitting down to create content. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important separation.
Oh,
go ahead.
I've got, I think one of the downsides and also upsides is with Headless CMSs, there's a ton of options. And I'm curious, mentioned earlier, someone was moving, CodeStacker's moving to Sanity. Anyone else used any other Headless CMS? I'd love to see in the chat. There's a ton of them, and that is a blessing and a curse. And Todd is asking if I made this GUI. No, this is the GUI that comes with Sanity. So no, I didn't make it. But one of the specific things about Sanity is you get full customization over the GUI and like the types and everything in it. It's a little bit unique from the rest of them in that the other ones, typically you can't customize the GUI itself, but you can customize what the data types are and the fields and things that you add.
I should totally call out that Todd is actually the maintainer and owner of a Laravel publishing platform, like a blogging platform called Canvas. So it's basically, kind of like a CMS where you can sign up and create content and have kind of like a back end analytics page and create content and have a blog on the front end. So he's kind of familiar with this space, but he comes at it from like a PHP Laravel point of view.
Gotcha. Very cool. Yeah, that's great. Great experience to have, especially for this conversation, because I think that will bring maybe some of the questions that you'll ask and kind of lead us to things that we hadn't thought to address, if that makes sense. Just from really having that perspective. CodeStacker is going back and forth between Sanity and Ghost for my blog, and currently using WordPress. And I think this is one of the things where WordPress has adapted to, they have like, you can use WordPress as a headless CMS. So you can use WordPress as the exact same thing that you used before. Now they've got libraries and APIs and a GraphQL library or API. I can't remember if it's, I don't know if the GraphQL layer is like specific to WordPress or if there's an adapter. I can't remember, but there's the exact same way that you could use a headless CMS like this, pull it into your Gatsby or whatever your site framework, or maybe it's not even a framework, whatever it is. You can just connect to it, grab all the data, and do what you want with it. So WordPress is definitely in that category as well. And then, like we were saying, there's a ton of options, which is good and also a little tough. So these are some of the open source ones. Open source in this case, I think, and if anybody knows differently, let me know. In this case, like, they're open source in the sense that like you take the source code for that that headless CMS, that GUI, and you will deploy it and manage it yourself. Is that a fair summary of how the open source ones work?
Yeah, so I can talk to Netlify CMS a little bit. Cool. That was one of the ones that I tried early on. And it was definitely early in its development process. But one of the great things is, yes, it's open source, it's free. And what you do is you essentially like add that code to your website. So right along your actual website is running this CMS. So you're hosting it and it's just kind of like more static files that you add. And what it does is it hooks up to your GitHub and gives you a user interface very similar to Sanity so that you can edit files and then it pushes directly to your GitHub.
And that's That's a really interesting one because it's a mix, right? Because it's still, you
Mm-hmm.
end up having files embedded in your source code,
Yep.
but you're not editing them like the raw files yourself. You're abstracted away with GUI. So maybe in some ways you get the best of both worlds.
Kind of. It's again, it's still like I think very early on in its life cycle, and it lacks a lot of features.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right; you still get to own your files. It's kind of like how we were talking about. Well, what if we just built our own GUI that was like some
Yeah.
Electron thing, right? But
Yeah.
instead of just putting it on your machine, now it's kind of hosted next to
Yep.
your website. And they use GitHub authentication in order to know that you're the only person who's
Mm-hmm.
going in there and writing this stuff. So you
Yep.
just set up your repository settings and allow for certain people to come in and edit, and that's how they pass you into the back end.
Okay. Um, so why, if you, let's come back to that in a minute.
Sure.
And if you want to give your perspective on how you liked it and what you're doing now, then we can kind of get into exactly, I guess I've talked a little bit about my opinion, but then we'll come back to you and just your experience and how you transitioned and
Yeah.
up until now. So a couple of other, just kind of scrolling down here, lots of open source ones. And then you get into ones down here, which are closed source. And maybe this is not like the exhaustive list that I thought it would be, I guess. Sanity is on here. Sanity is interesting because this is marked as closed source, but Sanity is like one of the big benefits about Sanity is like you manage dashboard itself also, in the sense that like you download it, you create a repository with that code, or I guess you're like forking it or whatever, and or I guess it's your own project, whatever. So they can generate the project for you. It's your code. You can deploy it to Netlify. You can actually deploy it to Sanity also, which is what I have up here. So there is a deploy command, and it will actually host your studio as well as all the data behind the scenes. And that's been really good for me. There, if I come down, here we go. So here's a couple of the ones that have really been top of mind for me, and I'm curious if people have other ones. Contentful is one I hear about all the time. Cosmic JS I've looked at and have used and did a video on YouTube. Data CMS I have done a video on with Gatsby Cloud, of Gatsby Cloud like generating a project and tying all these things together. Really super sweet. Forestry I haven't used, but this is one that you mentioned beforehand and I've heard a lot of good things about as well. And I'm trying to think if any other. Prismic is another one. Prismic has a really awesome tiering system where I think the free tier is unlimited like API requests, and then they've got like a $7 tier and a $15 tier or something. If I hadn't gone with Sanity, I probably would have gone with Prismic for that reason. Any other? Take Shape is another one I've heard good things about. Any other one from your perspective that I skimmed over and missed?
No, I think those are all the major ones. Graph CMS is another one I tried out early
Okay,
on as well.
cool. And yeah, there's so many options, and I think, at least from my perspective, there's not a whole. I think for me, I could have gone with a lot of different of these options. Like I tried out Cosmic JS, I could have done that, and I could have been totally fine. I could have gone with Prismic. I think that would be totally fine. I think all of these do the general idea of what a headless CMS should do. It comes down to if you find specific features or things that you're interested in that make a difference. And for me, the reason I chose Sanity was one, their pricing tier. Let me show this really quickly. Sanity and then pricing. They have a jump that scares me a little bit of $0 to $200 a month. But, and I've got to get them to update this. They say pay as you go, but they've got to like big bold that thing, because this was the thing for me. The free tier is super, super generous. And then if you need something specific, like more documents, more gigs of assets, different data sets, you can add those for a few bucks a month. Different API requests, you can add those like a la carte as you go on top of it. Other ones don't necessarily offer that sort of thing, and Contentful I think is one of them. Let me pull up their pricing. They go from, where is, like $39 a month to $879
Wow.
a month. And
Wow.
here's the thing, like Contentful is just flat out not targeted at you and me working on our side projects. Like I'm not. They probably still have a. Do they have a free tier? I would have thought they do.
They, I swear they do, because I was using a free tier when
There's
I
a
when I
yeah.
was on Contentful.
Okay, so start for free there. Um, but I think one of the interesting things when those price tags scare you a little bit, I think the perspective is just it's not for you and me, right? It's for like a big company. They've got lots of people who want to come in and edit content. They've got lots of records. They've got all these things that like we with our personal blogs are not having to worry about.
Yeah, and you can tell by the number of content types. Like
Mm-hmm.
on our personal blogs, we have one content type, maybe two, right? Like you have a stream and a blog post, but this look up to 48 content
48, yeah.
types or unlimited, right? Like
Yep.
this really is to house data of many different kinds.
At scale, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think for mine, so I've got blog posts, I've got teaching, or no, sorry, let me do this again. I've got blog posts, I've got speaking, like my speaking engagements, which I need to update desperately. Streaming, so I got my list of upcoming streams and previous streams done. And then I will also have a courses page, which I'm working on getting that together for this new course that I will release at the end of May on React and serverless if you're interested in that. So yeah, the pricing thing is definitely something to pay attention to. For the most part with these side projects, you probably don't break out of a free tier. So you're probably fine, but at least understand what your limitations are and what the next level above that is if you hit them. And Todd has sent this link for Statamic, which is
This website's amazing.
It's really cool. I want it, like the contrast is probably not quite as good as it should be up here on these things. I don't know. But it's really, really cool. And yeah, I've never seen or heard of this. Have you seen this one before?
No, but it looks like it's Git backed, version control everything. So it sounds like it's a Git based CMS.
Okay.
Similar to Netlify CMS.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own template language.
So that will lead us into, I think, the next part of this conversation for me after we finish looking at this. I love like landing pages are so cool. People are so much more creative than I am. I wish I could. I don't know. I've gotten better at design, but I wish I could have the idea to do like this random blob over here and think that makes sense.
Okay, you need to go look at the last testimonial.
Is it at the bottom of the page?
Yeah.
Oh, these are super cool. You see a video here. That's really nice. The GUI looks nice, as you would probably imagine it would. I'm a huge fan. Blah blah blah. And man who catch fly with chopstick accomplish anything. Mr. Miyagi from Miyagi Do Karate. I mean, I don't know why they would even have other ones on there. This is the only one they need, right? So to answer your question, I haven't heard of it. The only hesitation I would have is just because I haven't heard of it in terms of like a lot of other people are using it, but that's just me, right? Like that doesn't mean I have awareness of everything out there. That's amazing. Looks really cool. It has the general like promises of what a headless CMS is. So that I think just makes perfect sense. I'm curious if anyone has tried it out, or Todd, if you've tried it out, that'd be good to hear. I'm curious what their pricing tier is.
The pricing's pretty rough.
Ooh, tough. Yeah.
Yep.
One live domain with direct support and unlimited updates for $199. And
so their free trial is only local. You can't deploy anything.
So yeah, that. I mean, the answer is simple for like I'm not going to use it, right? Because
yep.
And I feel like in some ways I'm selfish, right? I'm so cheap and there's so many great free tiers that I'm spoiled. Like at the end of the day, they created an amazing product, like Sanity. They created an amazing product and I'm really focused on not giving them any money for it. Like that's a little bit selfish, right? But the whole model with these free tiers is you get people on that like the platform, including Auth0, and then they take that to their companies where it scales and they say, well, I've used this thing and it's really great. It works well for me. This would be great for our company to adapt or adopt. And that's just kind of that like migration path from individual developer to the next tier. So for me, I almost feel like, I don't know. I feel bad for myself that I'm just like, no, it costs money. I'm not going to use it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to win customers when there's a very steep onboarding cost.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Pricing pages are a kick in the junk. Fair enough. Mr. Miyagi kick in the junk, which is the worst kind that you can have. There was one, oh gosh. So talking about what did they rats? I shouldn't have closed the website. What was one of the things they bragged about on their site just now about? Dang it! Let me bring it back up. Statamic. There's something about the content itself that I had, like, was going to drive my brain. Oh, you mentioned that they had their own template language, or
Oh yeah.
so here's one of the hesitations that I have with headless CMSs in general, and I expressed this to the people at Sanity, and we had conversations about it, and it actually went really well. Is any time that you get into a different headless CMS, how they store your content is up to them for the most part. How they represent your content is up to them for the most part. The interesting thing about an embedded CMS is if you use Markdown, and if you use, I get like quote unquote vanilla Markdown, you use like the basic standard Markdown, then Markdown is Markdown, and like I can take this Markdown file and I could put it anywhere that accepts Markdown. So for me, I was a little hesitant to move to a headless CMS for the fact that like once it gets into whatever their structure is for data, it's not necessarily just Markdown that I can take anywhere else if I decided to migrate. In Sanity specifically, so if you want to know from my experience, they have something called portable text, which is basically their standard that they created, open source standard, for representing rich text as a JSON object. And with that comes the implication that like you can parse that and do really interesting and powerful things in terms of how you query it, for example, and then actually how you display it in your actual application. What I kind of wanted at first was I just want to give Markdown directly to Sanity because I use Stack Edit as a Markdown editor and on the browser, which is really nice and it works well. And I've been doing that for a while. And I could just keep everything as Markdown, but then have it saved in Sanity so that at any point I could just go into another headless CMS or back to an embedded CMS if I wanted to. At the end of the day, though, I think regardless of whatever option you use, you'll have, if you end up migrating, you'll have some sort of work that you have to do. Either you have to like write a script to like go through all of your posts and like convert them to Markdown, or whatever it is you have to do, there'll be some sort of migration process. And if you end up switching, just know that you'll probably have to do something like that unless that company gives you some sort of option to migrate the stuff for you.
Yep. And I hear you there. And it's funny because, you know, James transitioned from an embedded CMS to a headless CMS. I actually went the other way around. I went from Contentful down to plain Markdown, but I definitely had to do some work to get it out of Contentful. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the message we're trying to get across here, is that, you know, it gives the CMS companies or the CMS, you know, who own your data at that point, free reign to kind of store and do whatever they want with it in that sense. Yep. So you're just going to have to put transformers in there or write scripts or do something to get it out how you need it.
And I would probably say for both of us, just in us talking about this, at the end of the day, like you went one way, I've gone the other way, but we were probably on the fence about both of those decisions. Or correct, at the very least, we could see it both ways. So I like for people out there that maybe are like trying to make a decision, as a developer, like make a decision and run with it and see what happens. Like I don't think you'll truly know which one you prefer until you actually do both. And I don't, especially if you have like a small blog, there's not a whole lot of risk in like migrating it over. You can spend a week or something testing it out, see how it goes. You'll be fine either way. Like you'll find the things I think that bug you the most, and you'll either like do some automation stuff yourself, some tooling to help fix those things, or you'll have a headless CMS and you'll figure out that you miss a little bit of something and you'll write your own script to convert it down to Markdown just in case you need it later on to like export all of your stuff out of there. So at the end of the day, I don't think you can make like a wrong decision. It's just about what specific things make the most sense for you.
I tried to frame it in a sense of longevity, right? You know, I made one transition from Contentful over to Markdown, and I said, okay, in the future, what if I had to transition from Contentful to Sanity? That seemed to be a lot more work going from CMS to CMS to CMS, especially if those CMSs have different flavors and ideas, versus saying, okay, I'm just going to keep everything myself, invest a little bit of time into doing tooling
Yep.
And to me, that kind of has longer legs than kind of jumping to the new CMS hotness every 5 years or so, which that's what developers do, right? You take your website, you move it to a new platform. That's par for the course.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. And that was why I had the concern of, if I need, like, if Sanity all of a sudden changed their pricing, for example, and it was $50 a month, I'm out.
Yep.
Like, I'm
Yep.
not going to do that. But if that were the case, like, that's a problem anyway. So where I am now in my head, like, I'll spend the couple of days it takes to write whatever scripts I need to, and just like convert it back to Markdown embedded for the time being, and just like run with it until I'm ready for something else. Like, if it comes down to it, I can take a couple days to do the migration and get it done. But I don't plan on doing that unless I'm really forced to. And hopefully it is 5 years before I even have to think about that sort of thing.
So one of the things that was really important to me when I was trying to choose between all this stuff is having a development environment. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be able to either be editing my front end or editing my content, and be able to see those changes in two places: one locally, and two deployed to some URL, because I wanted to be able to see it as I'm doing it live right here on my computer. And then when I think I'm done with it, send a link to like a friend or my wife and say like, hey, go read this when you have a chance.
Yep.
And I found that Netlify makes this super easy. Netlify and Gatsby, that whole stack, because everything is Git based, is very easy to spin up a branch, commit changes, whether that be to your front end code or to your content, and Netlify will just make branches for you. But with the CMS that I was using at the time, Contentful, it took a ton of work to make this happen. I had to mess with environment variables. I had to break into like my Netlify build to understand if I was building a branch or if I was building master. And I had to use that to determine what Contentful API to hit to pull draft posts or not. And so it was this whole convoluted environment variable mess just to get some kind of development site up and running. And being that I'm a developer and everything's in Git, I just found that Netlify's version of this was so much easier to handle that.
And so now at this point, you're just rubbing it in, because I've already told you how jealous I am that you deploy to a specific subdomain, and I'm assuming it's something small that I just don't know. But just for awareness of what I do, since I can show mine, I've got my James Q Quick site, and I guess there's, so where is actually under, am I in the deploy section? Somewhere I specified, like, if it's the development branch, give me a preview URL for that. And where is that section actually? Is it in, it's not an overview.
So if you go to deploy
settings,
or sorry, yeah, you're looking for domain management.
For the thing that you're doing?
Yeah. What do you, oh, you're referring to something different.
I do want to see yours. I first was just going to show how I've got mine set up to show that the production branch is master. Deploy previews, automatically build deploy previews for all pull requests. Okay. And then I did a thing that said, let me add individual branches. So this is how, when I do a push to develop, it is going to do a preview link to that build. The only thing I'm missing, and I will go to what you're saying in a second, is under these deploys, if I can find one of my developed ones, it will give me a URL for that thing, but it's just a random URL. So like, that's the URL for that build. And it's really easy in Netlify with static sites, because they just literally like, they saved a directory with those files in them, and they can serve it from this URL with whatever like domain mapping they have. But I would like to set mine up to go to like dev.jamesqquick.com. So, all right, tell me where that setting would be.
So I'm going to enlighten you to something else, actually.
Okay.
So if you go back to like that specific deploy branch, or that specific like commit deploy,
I think
I'm
in this now.
Click preview deploy right there.
So inside of the browser.
So you'll notice that the left-hand side is like kind of like a git commit hash, right?
Okay. Is it actually a git commit hash?
It might actually be. I'm not totally sure. Okay. But this refers to that specific commit. Another way that Netlify handles your URLs is you could replace that commit hash with your branch name.
Okay, so I would need to be at develop dash dash and then the general name. So like Elephant Dubinsky is the name that Netlify gives my site before my custom domain.
Yeah.
So like
So,
this,
mhm.
that worked.
And that's valid. So what that is
Okay.
you specifically said I want branch builds for develop only.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you made some other branch called foo,
Yep.
and if you change that setting, just let Netlify publish preview URLs for every single branch you have. So if at any time you want to see what the latest in that branch looks like, you could just do that.
Sweet. Okay.
Now, how you want to put it in front of your actual domain name. To do that, you'd go under domain management.
Domain
So settings on the far right,
settings.
domain management on the left.
Yep.
And it's called branch subdomains.
Branch subdomains done.
So it looks like you already have develop done for develop.jamesquick.com because you enabled branch builds.
Ooh. Oh. So is that, do I already have what I'm jealous of you for having and I just don't know it?
It looks like you may.
So they must give it to me for free.
I think they do it automatically for any branch build you enable. Oh,
let me see.
Develop.jamesquick.com.
Did I type that right? Like it
Interesting.
pull that.
Are you using Netlify DNS?
Up here?
It looks like you are. Huh.
So in theory, though, this is where. Oh, maybe they've created a subdomain, but they haven't actually connected it. So like they listed that there was a subdomain, but maybe it didn't look like it was manually connected to develop branch.
Maybe, yeah. That's okay. Wow, that's weird.
So can I trigger a deploy of a specific branch?
Yep. If you go and click on like the last build of that branch.
Okay.
So, yep, you can search develop and then click on it, and then there'll be like a redeploy.
Retry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me do that. That might actually go to where we want. As we're probably close to wrapping up. People that are left in the chat, how do we do? Any thoughts on the stuff that you're working on? Did we help you get kind of a overview of Headless CMS versus Embedded CMS? Does it change anything? Do you have any extra questions for us? Do you disagree with anything we said? Let us know in the chat as we start to wrap up here, just to make sure that all questions are addressed if you have any. It was helpful. Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, I'd like to say one of the things that can go both ways is image transforms. So if you happen to pick Gatsby on your front end, any of your image content is going to be kind of automatically scaled, resized, and everything at build time. But
only if you like, you still have to specifically use Gatsby image, right?
Correct. Yeah. So that's like depending on the static site generator that you use.
You might.
CMS wise, depending on what you use, they might also provide that for you as a service.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Contentful did the same thing where you'd load images there and they'd give you sized versions that are kind of queryable to their REST API.
Yep. And for what it's worth, Sanity does the same thing. And the only reason I clarified that you still have to use Gatsby image is I found Gatsby image to be a little confusing when I set it up the first time. And I'm still like, I probably couldn't just do it by myself. Like I would still have to go back to the docs. But basically, well, yeah, I don't know if it did some transformation of things that then exposed it into the GraphQL layer, and you could query it and then use the thing that you queried inside of an image tag, which is a Gatsby image tag. And so there's things about it that I don't fully like. They don't quite click with me. So the only reason I specified is that it does take a little bit of intentional effort to do it. But yes, they do it. They have the ability to do it. And like you said, they have that sort of stuff in like a lot of Headless CMS options as well. And I wonder, like, with all these different Headless CMS options doing that sort of stuff, how does something, I don't know if you know this or not, how does Cloudinary fit into that? Like, what is Cloudinary only if you use, like, if you're not using a headless CMS and you just need image optimization specifically, you go to Cloudinary? Like, if it's
Yeah,
built in to something else, you probably just do it there, right?
you could do it that way too. Or let's say you're using a CMS that doesn't offer image hosting. Let's say you're using Netlify CMS, right? Which is a Git-based CMS.
Mm-hmm.
Your choice is to stick images directly in GitHub, and you might not have those nice transforms.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say you're not using Gatsby on the front end or not doing a build that includes image transforms, then you could reach out to Cloudinary as just an image hosting service.
Okay. And that is actually one of the things that did bother me about my embedded CMS also. I guess I never actually had a problem with it, but I didn't like adding a bunch of images into my source code in theory, because if I scaled and had like hundreds of images, then like someone checking out my code for the first time, like that would really suck, right? Like that would take a long time probably, but maybe it's not as big a deal as I was worried it might be.
No, you're right. Like, so I think Git-based CMSs or, embedded CMSs are a great option for when to turn to Cloudinary. But Cloudinary, they do have a free tier, but eventually it'll cost money. So it's one of those things where I was like, I don't know if I can commit to that.
Yep.
Depending, and that depends on how many times that's kind of based on views. So if your blog gets popular and your images are from Cloudinary and you're pulling them down, either you have to like cache them, maybe write some kind of Cloudflare worker or something to cache them so that you're not actually hitting Cloudinary. Or you just kind of, as you get more popular, find a way to monetize that and pay that debt.
Yep. And that has definitely been something that I was a little nervous of as well. I mean, we're all developers. We're probably all really cheap. So I'm sure we all pay attention to that. And Marcus Lyons was specifying earlier that yes, Gatsby image you have to use to get that image optimization in Gatsby. Also saying you can use Cloudinary for generating things like the open graph images for social sharing. That's really interesting.
That's amazing. Yeah.
I was just reading something that I think it's an article by Jason Langsdorff of how he was doing that. And then there's also the Wes Boss approach of doing it as well. So this is actually in one of my backlogs, is to do something that will automatically generate those social images. If you'd like to see that in a stream, if you'd like to join me to help walk me through doing that, or just participate in the chat, let me know. Apparently,
Jason he's an NPM package.
Yeah, so that is, what's the name of the NPM package? And I will look that up. But I've actually, if anyone knows this right offhand, I've wondered this. Does that serverless function generate the image every time, or like real time, or does it generate the image once and then save it in somewhere like Cloudinary? Does that make sense? Like if someone adds a link to say this is where the image is, does it make a request to an endpoint basically and it generates the image and then sends it back? Or does it generate the image the first time and then save it in a database so that it's there? Or does it cache it in memory somewhere? I don't know.
So you're talking about like the social media platforms themselves, like Facebook?
No, I'm like, like inside of my blog post, for example, and it took me a little bit of time to get this figured out. By the way, develop.jamesqquick works after I did that connection.
Yo.
Sweet. So that's cool. Inside of here, I'm trying to think, like none of these have, well, anyway, inside of one of these, I did a lot of looking into, because I didn't know anything about it, defining the, wherever that damn property is for Twitter to know what the image URL is. Mm-hmm. So if that image URL is just like an API endpoint, what Twitter would be doing is like, as you add this thing as a tweet and a link, Twitter would then like make a request the same way it would for a regular image to the endpoint, and the endpoint could either like generate an image dynamically for you or generate it dynamically the first time and then save it also in the database so that the next time it comes, they could just get it from the database. Or with Cloudflare workers, which I know nothing about how they actually work, they could potentially like cache that thing so that like they create it once and kind of save it in memory. But that seems dangerous if you've got like a lot of images. You can't really cache that many. I don't know. I'm kind of beyond like my understanding right now.
So what you put in so you're looking for Twitter : image for Twitter or OG : image for Facebook. Yeah. And what typically goes in there is a URL.
Yep.
And so when you share a link on let's say Twitter, Twitter is going to make a request to that URL the very first time they see that link.
Yep.
They're going to pull the image down and then they're going to cache it on Twitter. Like in Twitter servers, they're probably going to cache that because
Twitter
I've
will cache
noticed.
that.
Yeah, because I've noticed if I change some of my social images and sharing images, it takes a long time for Twitter to refresh their cache. Now, Facebook is a little bit different.
Okay.
Facebook, you can go into a developer console and tell them, clear the cache of this URL. I want you to fetch fresh. And you can actually control kind of what they see for your stuff. And they have really handy, they call them card validators.
There's like a site, right, that you can just put in your link and it'll show you whether it has everything that it should.
Exactly. Yeah. So I linked the Facebook one and you'll see, hey, this, you could put in your website or something and they'll say, this was last scraped 3 days ago. And, we're not going to scrape it again for another week or something.
Okay. So.
And then you can tell it, hey, go get fresh data right now if you want.
And I don't think so. I was looking for my OG image, which a couple
looks like
of
you may not have one.
A couple of them just might be broken from doing my migration, which I haven't paid attention to. So it's something I need to look into now.
Yeah. So typically these URLs need to be fully qualified URLs and not relative, because when Facebook picks this up, they need to know what the base URL is.
Right. Yep. Let me try this one that's in the production, and I bet it's not going to work either. URL hasn't been shared. So fetch new and inferred property.
You got one. There you go.
Oh, I did. Okay. So maybe that is working. I couldn't find that link inside of my source code, so I'm not sure. Code Stacker says using AWS Lambda and it's cached for a time. So I think this is just a longer conversation for me to fully understand, but I'm wondering like where is the cache layer for that? Like where is it cached? That's what I don't know. And then this is one by Jason Langsdorff, which I really want to look into now.
That's awesome.
Creating this shared social image, and somewhere you have to actually like define what it looks like, right? But see, what this thing does is it generates an image. It gives you a Cloudinary URL, which to me sounds like it's saving that image in Cloudinary, which I'm a little bit cautious of, again, for like the not wanting to pay for Cloudinary just in case, right?
Yeah. So from what I understood, the way Wes Boss did it was he actually rendered Gatsby pages sized the same as
a card.
Like a card, yeah, like a 16:9 something or other. And I'm sure I could find it on his website, his new website, but there should be a page for like the social images for everything. And what he does is he just uses that page, and I think it's the same as the slug, to pass that into his OG information.
Okay. By the way, I don't think my thing worked on Twitter. So I'd had some code inside of the SEO thing. So for my SEO component, I passed in the image property, which like I would either use the image that was there or default to this one, which is still relative path. Did I use anything to, let's see, Twitter image? So I guess I did just do that thing relative path, which is not going to work. So I've got to check that out too. But like I wrap all of my pages in the SEO component and then pass in these things, including in this case, the image. But on my post now, where do I reference SEO? Or maybe it's on the blog post template page. Is that okay? So SEO is in here. And then I passed the cover image URL, which I haven't updated. Since I migrated, I just left this like stubbed out, so it doesn't have anything in it. So that is a gap of something I need to finish. You upload an initial template to Cloudinary, and then from there, the generated URLs at build time, inject the title and description. So Marcus, you still have the potential to like um, overrate your or overcall your API, right? Like you potentially throw yourself into a free tier if it makes a certain number of requests to that URL. Yeah, you definitely. Okay, cool. And that's I mean, just being cheap. That's probably one of my biggest concerns. So at the end of the day, we learned that my image stuff I did not add back in to here, and this is where I actually took care of. Like I think having the root here was with props, site, metadata, site URL, and then I could add on whatever I wanted to. So sure, Jason has enough hits where he's likely paying for it, but I don't know for sure. I mean, I would imagine. By the way, Marcus, are we friends on Twitter or anywhere else outside of Twitch? Thanks for being involved, by the way, and sharing all the links and stuff and feedback.
Finding out how Wes Boss's stuff works is interesting. Ooh.
Are you looking at that now?
I'm looking at his source. Yeah.
Okay.
He basically passes information as query parameters into a serverless function that generates it for him.
So real time, that serverless function is generating an image?
Yeah, it looks like it.
Which that seems like the simplest way. The only problem is, and I don't know what the caching layer would be, but
so if he's using that's weird if he's using Netlify functions. So I would assume then he uses Cloudflare, which is in front of wesboss.com, which is a CDN that he puts up in front of wesboss.com. And you can use these things called workers to intercept incoming requests to your website. Mm-hmm. And so I would assume he would just write something like, hey, if you're requesting an OG image, because that's the endpoint, mm-hmm. Check the cache first and send that back.
So I've always really wanted to understand the details of this. One, how does Cloudflare know that you can intercept those things? Like, do you have to verify that you own that domain in Cloudflare? You have to, right?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. It's something that you hook up to your domain.
And then, so after you do that, that makes sense. And then you're going to intercept. Maybe you can check like the query parameters to see like only the OG images, like you said. What is the caching mechanism in there? Like, is it just in memory in Cloudflare workers, or do they have, what is the cache? Do you know?
Yeah, I think there's an API that says just serve this from cache, because I don't think you control that. I think that's Cloudflare's business, right? But okay. You say, okay, no, send this on to the server and do your thing, or no, serve from cache.
Okay. And then I imagine like the first time you generate the image, you save it in the cache also?
I think that would be what Cloudflare would do. So you could set cache headers on the network requests, which might instruct it to save for like 30 days or something.
Okay. Interesting. And yep. Marcus said, just follow me on Twitter. Cool. I will, when we get done, I will follow you as well. And you're linking to the show in Syntax where they talked about this. And I've listened to it. I probably need to do it again just because of like, there is a piece of this that I'm missing. And I think I've actually watched Wes Boss's video on YouTube talking about this as well.
Yeah.
But I'm just, so your co-stacker sending I'm assuming it's that same video that I'm talking about. Let me see this link. I'm assuming it's the same one. So maybe I've got a better understanding now, but there's still a little bit I'm missing of just how these things like actually interact, especially with the cache. And maybe it's just headers. And this, again, is stuff I know nothing about. So maybe it is just like in the headers, you can tell it how to do it. So yeah, I have watched this video. I need to probably watch it again.
Yeah, this mainly focuses on the image generation portion. He has another video where he talks a little bit more in depth about service workers, like edge service workers, but not in relation to this. But yeah, if you're not leveraging cache here, I think you would get just like totally slammed. Like your Netlify functions would get completely slammed.
Yep. Okay, cool. That's all. This is the kind of stuff that I really enjoy, especially when it's like people are engaged and asking questions and kind of leading us to new stuff. I think we are. So we usually go for an hour and a half max, and we're a little bit over. Um, any last comments, thoughts for people in the chat? And then Brad, what can I pull up to show people of you? I think you mentioned YouTube channel.
Yeah, youtube.com/Brad Garropy. Trying to produce content there. A lot of live streams going on right now.
And you might be on your way to moving over to Twitch someday soon, maybe.
I think I'm gonna move over to Twitch. Yeah, it seems to be the place to be.
Sweet.
Yeah, this is my website, bradgarropy.com. I've got a blog here and a users page. I have a pretty sick setup here, working from home.
I need to update my uses page, which I also don't advertise. Like it's not on my thing over here.
Yeah.
But I do have a uses also, and I've got a really sick picture of my setup that I want to include. Because this is not super interesting, but I want to show a picture of it anyway. So
yeah, we all stare at your background, which is real nice. I wonder what you're looking at.
What's here? Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, so they can't see it. You can see more. I just added like little side tables to the sides of the couch, and then I got lamps that I bought the Hue bulbs with, the Philips Hue bulbs, which are expensive. Yeah. So like 2 is like $90 or something. And so like with this, you probably won't be able to see it very much, especially in the stream. But if I can get to the app, I can control both of these from my phone, so I can like change the color to like yellow. Does that come through in the stream? Probably. I think we're a few more seconds delayed now. There we go. And then I can also change like the intensity or like how bright it is. And then behind me, which my wife and I were working on this earlier, on the wall in the center are mixed tiles, and they're like sticky, and you can choose the image that goes on them. And these are all like conferences that I've spoken at or been to. So like the idea is I'm just going to continue to build out this like wall of conferences and people that are like places that I've engaged in really fun environments. So
nice. And you can choose the prints on those mixed tiles.
Yep. Yeah. That's so awesome. She went and grabbed like the logos for the different ones, and then the learn, build, teach that you can not quite see maybe is the red one. That's like part of my brand. So yeah, really excited about like having some of this stuff come together, because I had some bulky shelves back there for a while, and then I had just like nothing there for the last couple of weeks, and now I think I'm really starting to get like the backdrop that I've wanted.
I need to work on that. This is not the best.
Well, it's interesting because to me it looks good because you're lit up, you've got plenty of light, and the focus is not on your background, right? But it's not empty. Like you have something there, and it seems natural to me. So I was actually thinking like I actually really enjoy yours. But so yeah, that's what I'm working on, and try to get to something like in the back that I'm proud of also.
Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Well, I usually just kind of hang around for a few more seconds just in case any other thoughts before we wrap up and call it a day. Thanks everyone that was here, and especially people that are participating, asking questions. It's really fun to have those conversations and want to do more. Definitely check out, last shout out to the Auth0 channel if you're interested in more streams and great content. I'd love to see you in the Auth0 channel. May 5th is when we'll do the stream with Gatsby, which I'm super excited about. And then we're working on scheduling out either 1 or 2 streams a month for the next couple of months on the Auth0 channel as well. WebDev Charlie says, thanks, great job. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. All right. Well, Brad, to you, thanks to you as well. Thanks for coming on. I'm sure I feel like we don't stop talking and chatting about this stuff. So I'm sure we'll have something else to stream about or just collaborate on in the meantime. So thanks again for coming on. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you, man. Really appreciate you having me. Gave me a great opportunity here.
Cool. All right. Well, I will actually, I always forget to do this. Let me make sure I do. Let me raid somebody else's channel. They're still running the Apollo GraphQL channel. I'm going to raid everybody over there, and you can see what Sam and Kurt are working on. And I don't know if I need to kill my stream before I raid over or not. I'm not sure how that works, but Apollo GraphQL. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and raid us over, and I will talk to everyone later.